The sky over Nebraska was the color of a bruised plum, heavy with the scent of ozone and rotting vegetation as Elena drove her battered SUV down the narrow dirt track. On either side, the corn stood 8 feet tall, a vast golden-brown sea that seemed to shiver even when there was no wind. The stalks rattled like dry bones, a rhythmic, abrasive sound that filled the cabin of her car. She had returned to the family farm after 10 years of silence, not for a reunion, but to bury the man who had haunted her dreams, her father, Silas. He had been found in a locked room with a shotgun, though the local sheriff had been too disturbed to describe the state of the walls, covered in thousands of handwritten radio frequencies and frantic, scribbled diagrams of human anatomy being, and quote, retuned, and quote. As she stepped into the Victorian-style farmhouse, the air felt thick, as if she were walking through invisible cobwebs. The house felt smaller than she remembered, hunched under the weight of the surrounding corn. Her brother, Thomas, was waiting in the kitchen. He looked like a hollowed-out version of the boy she remembered. His eyes were sunken so deep into his skull they were mere shadows, and his hands twitched in a rhythmic, mechanical pattern, tapping against his thighs. Before she could even offer a greeting, he held up a finger, his voice a jagged whisper that barely cut through the air. And quote, "Don't turn them off, Elena. If the sound stops, the silence gives them a door. If the door opens, they don't just walk in, they broadcast." And quote, only then did she notice the radios. Every surface, the counters, the shelves, the floor, even the stairs, was covered in old transistor sets, ham radios, and heavy vacuum tube receivers from the 1940s. They were all tuned to different bands of white noise, a cacophony of static that sounded like 1,000 snakes hissing in unison. The sound was physical. It vibrated in Elena's teeth and made the hair on her arms stand up. Thomas moved among them like a priest tending to flickering candles, adjusting dials with obsessive precision, his lips moving in a silent prayer to the static. That night, the house breathed with the rhythm of the interference. Elena lay in her childhood bed, staring at the ceiling where the wallpaper was peeling like dead skin. The static outside her door rose and fell like a tide, a wall of sound designed to keep something out, or perhaps to drown something out. At exactly 3 a.m., the noise cut out. Every radio in the house went silent at the exact same microsecond. The silence was so sudden it felt like a physical blow to her chest, a vacuum that sucked the air from her lungs. Then, the small radio on her nightstand clicked on with a sharp, metallic pop. And quote, "Elena," and quote, a voice whispered. It was her own voice, not as she sounded now, but as she sounded when she was 5 years old, innocent and high-pitched. And quote, "Elena is sitting up now. Elena is looking at the closet. Don't look at the closet, Elena. He's using your eyes as a lens. He likes the color of your fear. It's a high-frequency vibration," end quote. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. In the reflection of the vanity mirror, she saw a shape. A tall, impossibly thin figure with limbs like rusted rebar, standing just behind her shoulder. Its skin looked like scorched parchment, and where its face should have been, there was only a swirling gray mist of electronic snow. When she spun around, the room was empty, but her childhood voice laughed from the speaker, a sound that dissolved into the screeching, agonizing groan of a dying animal. Driven by a mix of terror and fury, Elena grabbed a heavy flashlight and ran for the basement, where Thomas spent his hours. The stairs creaked in protest, sounding like screams. But the man she found in the cellar wasn't and Appos, her brother. Thomas was sitting in a throne of tangled copper wire and jagged scrap metal. He had sliced his own forearms, allowing blood to drip onto a custom-built amplifier, the red liquid acting as a conductor. End quote. "It's almost tuned, Elena," end quote. He croaked, his jaw unhinging further than humanly possible, skin stretching until it tore at the corners of his mouth. End quote. "Mom is coming back through the shortwave. We just needed a stronger antenna. We just needed more organic material to catch the signal." End quote. From the speakers surrounding him, a distorted version of their mother's favorite lullaby began to play, but the notes were wrong. They were frequencies that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly into the brain. making Elena's nose bleed and her vision blur. Realizing the thing in front of her was a puppet, Elena fled into the night. She burst through the back door and plunged into the cornfield, the stalks whipping against her face like serrated knives. The field had transformed. The rows were no longer straight. They were shifting, closing in behind her to form a living, rustling maze that seemed to breathe with a collective consciousness. Under the flickering light of a dry lightning storm that produced no thunder, she saw them. Hundreds of rusted loudspeakers hanging from the power lines that crisscrossed the property like a web. From every speaker, the voices of the dead began to scream. Her father's voice, her mother's voice, and Thomas's voice, all pleading for her to, end quote, stop running and join the broadcast, end quote. She stumbled into a hidden clearing where an old shack stood, the place where her father had kept his tools. Inside, the beam of her flashlight hit something that froze her soul. It was Thomas, the real Thomas. His body was mummified, wrapped in miles of copper wire that had been sewn through his skin and bolted to a massive, pulsating transmitter. He had been dead for weeks, his body used as a biological battery. The thing in the house, the thing that had greeted her at the door, was nothing more than a skin suit woven from sound waves and hijacked memories. A shadow fell over the doorway. The end quote, messenger end quote, stood there, its frame filling the entrance. Its face was a smooth, featureless pane of frosted glass, and behind the glass, gray static swirled like a trapped blizzard. End quote. Humanity is such a noisy, inefficient frequency, end quote. The entity said, its voice a perfect, terrifying mimicry of Elena's own tone. End quote. We are just here to clear the air. We are the silence between the stations. We are the static that remains when the lights go out. End quote. In a final act of desperation, Elena grabbed a canister of gasoline from the corner of the shack. As the entity lunged, its limbs stretching like pulled taffy, she struck a lighter. End quote. Broadcasting ends now. End quote. She screamed. The explosion was deafening. A roar of orange flame that climbed high into the Nebraska night, turning the corn stalks into pillars of fire. Elena ran until her lungs burned like hot coals, collapsing at the edge of the highway as the sun began to peek over the horizon, a pale, sickly yellow. Hours later, a state trooper pulled over, seeing her huddled by the road, covered in soot and blood. He rushed to her side, his hand on his radio. End quote. I and Oppos. V found her. I need a medic at mile marker 42. End quote. He looked at Elena, his face full of concern. End quote. Are you okay, Ma and Oppos? Can you hear me? End quote. Elena looked up. Her eyes were no longer brown. They were swirling with gray, flickering pixels, moving in time with some unheard rhythm. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, the clear, crisp sound of a weather report began to emit from her throat, perfectly modulated. End quote. Highs of 82 degrees with a chance of evening storms. Expect heavy interference in the rural sectors. End quote. The trooper froze, his own shoulder-mounted radio beginning to scream with a feedback loop that sounded like a choir of the damned. As he backed away in horror, every scarecrow in the distant, charred cornfield slowly turned its head to face the road, their straw faces twisting into grins. The signal wasn't an Oppos, T destroyed. It had simply found a better, more mobile host, and now the broadcast was going global.